In this video, we'll be going over spell cards that were created as retrains of other cards that happen to be really good on their own, or vastly improve over the original card. And at number 10, we have Toon Kingdom. This card is a retrain of Toon World, a continuous spell card that is required to be on the field in order to use Toon monsters. And the original version didn't actually have an effect, and simply required you to pay 1,000 life points in order to activate the card. The retrained Toon Kingdom treats its name as Toon World while on the field. It is a field spell card, so it benefits from field searchers like terraforming, and actually does things to help protect your toons. You see, while this card is on the field, your Toon monsters cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects, as you can banish one card from the top of your deck in order to prevent their destruction. And also, your Toon monsters cannot be targeted by card effects, so it's some of the best protection that a field card can provide in Archetype: destruction and target immunity, which is really good. And this card does have a negative when activated, where you have to banish the top 3 cards of your deck face down, which isn't a big deal. Now, even though this field spell card is super good and does a lot to help toons not be terrible when their old Toon World was so bad, the toons themselves are so inherently flawed that they still don't see any competitive play, even with a monster of a field spell card like Toon Kingdom. Although explaining the flaws with the Toon archetype could be a video topic in of itself, but basically they're too reliant on Toon World, and if this card is destroyed, then all your toons basically destroy themselves as well, which some of the brand new support tries to rectify. And at number 9, we have Hey Trunade. This card is a retrain of Giant Trunade, a banned spell card which has the effect to return all spell trap cards on the field to the hand. And what Hey Trunade does is it allows you to return all set spell or trap cards to the hand. It's basically the same effect, except it doesn't target all spell and traps and only the set ones, as the problem with the original Giant Trunade was the vast amount of beneficial ways to take advantage of returning cards that are face up back to your hand, while at the same time just getting rid of your opponent's back row with non-destruction card removal. Hey Trunade kind of tries to keep the back row removal part while not allowing you to recycle your own face-up spell or traps, and does an excellent job at that, and is the reason this card occasionally sees competitive play, as it allows you to get rid of all of your opponent's set spell and traps without destroying them, which actually allows it to bypass a lot of different effects and doesn't require you to have a certain field setup, like using evenly matched requires. In normal Yu-Gi-Oh!, Hey Trunade sees competitive play every now and then. In Duel Links, Hey Trunade is kinda broken and is currently on their ban list over there, so it's not as strong as the original, but it's still a good card, which is why it makes this list. Because it's not about cards being better than their retrains, it's about cards that are retrains that are also good, which this card definitely succeeds at. And at number 8, we have Double Evolution Pill. This card is a retrain of Ultra Evolution Pill, and maybe even Big Evolution Pill. 2 Evolution Pills which were introduced to the game in one of the earlier sets of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which had effects that benefited dinosaur-type monsters, where Ultra Evolution Pill allowed you to tribute a reptile-type monster to special summon any dinosaur monster from your hand, which wasn't very good. Big Evolution Pill allowed you to tribute a dinosaur-type monster so that you could normal summon dinosaur-type monsters from your hand without tributing for 3 turns, which was a bit better. And Double Evolution Pill allows you to special summon a level 7 or higher dinosaur-type monster from your hand or deck, ignoring its summoning conditions, which is definitely much better than both of those 2 cards combined, as the requirements are just to banish 1 dinosaur monster and a non-dinosaur monster from your hand or graveyard, which is super easy to fulfill in dinosaur decks, as most of them will be playing hand traps that are not dinosaur type. And also, dinosaur decks excel at getting other dinosaurs in the graveyard. And they also have very good level 7 or higher dinosaur type monsters to special summon from the deck. 2 targets in fact. There's their super good boss monster, Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, which has 3500 attack, can attack all of your opponent's monsters once each, has spell speed 2 disruption effect to flip all of your opponent's monsters face down, and has an additional effect where it can non-destruction remove cards that it attacks which are face down. And then there's Overtext Coatless, which has a once per turn negate of a spell or trap card, and on its destruction can search out another Evolution Pill card from your deck. So it's able to bring out 2 really good monsters from the deck very easily, which is why it sees competitive play. And at number 7, we have Crossout Designator. This card is a retrained version of Noblemen of Crossout, and they don't really have anything in common other than the card artwork and naming conventions. You see, the original Noblemen of Crossout allows you to banish a face-down monster and then banish all other monsters of the same name from both players' deck if it was a flip monster. And what Crossout Designator does is it allows you to banish one card from your deck in order to negate the effects of all other cards that share that card's name for the rest of the turn. So, if you use this during your first turn and banish an Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, that will stop your opponent from being able to use Ash Blossom on you. Same with Nibiru if you want to go into a whole bunch of combos. Since most people will play the same hand traps, it's a pretty handy card to play against hand traps, which is why it sees a healthy amount of competitive play. Whereas the original Nullement of Crossout used to be a meta card too, when flip effect monsters were a big deal, and was even on the ban list because of it. So the Retrain definitely lives up to the legacy of the original, even though they both do completely different things. And at number 6, we have Twin Twisters. This card is a retrain of Mystical Space Typhoon, who used to be the most played card in the game, and has a ton of other retrains as well. Technically, Cosmic Cyclone can make this part of the list as well, and shares its place with Twin Twisters. It's another retrain of Mystical Space Typhoon and also sees a ton of competitive play. And what these cards do is they allow you to destroy spell or trap cards on a quick play spell card, which means you can use them during your turn as soon as you draw them in order to clear out problem cards in the field, like Mystic Mine or other floodgates, or use them during your opponent's end phase in order to destroy trap cards before they get a chance to activate. And Twin Twisters simply allows you to destroy 2 cards at the cost of discarding 1 from your hand. So it's just a straight up power crept version of Mystical Space Typhoon, which only allows you to destroy 1 spell or trap card for no cost. It's like having 2 Mystical Space Typhoons in 1. Cosmic Cyclone allows you to get rid of 1 spell or trap card as well, and requires you to pay 1000 life points, but it banishes the card instead of destroys it, which allows it to bypass all kinds of floating effects that spell or trap cards might have, which a lot of meta decks do have. That being the case, Mystical Space Typhoon still sees competitive play itself, even though it has power crept versions of it out there, just to kind of show how strong this card is. Although out of all of them, Twin Twisters definitely sees the most amount of play, and in fact at one point was the most played card in the game as well, and is still very heavily played even today. And at number 5, we have Forbidden Droplet. This card is a retrained version of Forbidden Chalice, a quick play spell card which allows you to negate the effects of a monster on the field, but also increases that monster's attack by 400. Now, Forbidden Chalice still sees competitive play. It's a good card. Being able to get monster effects is always good, especially on a quick play spell card which can be used from your hand during your first turn. That's half the reason why Infinite Impermanence is good, although the other half is that it can be used during your opponent's turn from your hand, which is a much better effect. Now, Forbidden Droplet is not actually in the TCG yet, but in the OCG it's already seen a ton of competitive play, so it will most definitely also see play once it's released in the TCG. And what it does is it allows you to send any number of cards from your hand or field to the graveyard in order to have the attack of exactly that many effect monsters your opponent controls, and also negate their effects permanently. And it's worded in a way where it doesn't technically target, and also your opponent can't activate cards in response to this card if you sent a card to the graveyard of the same type to activate this effect, which is a little confusing. Basically, if you send a spell card to the graveyard to activate this, your opponent can't activate any spell cards in response to this. Or if you send a monster card, your opponent can't activate monster effects. If you sent all 3 types of cards, this card gains full spell speed 4 status and can't be responded to by anything. And the reason this is important is because it allows you to bypass negates. If your opponent has a monster with a negate or a trap card with a negate, if you simply send a monster and a trap card to the graveyard to activate Forbidden Droplet, then your opponent can't stop this card from negating their effects, as it permanently negates and cuts their attack in half, which is a very good way of dealing with problem boss monsters. Although it does require a lot of resources to do this, but it deals with problem boss monsters, and most decks are all about putting up a whole bunch of problem boss monsters that your opponent can't respond to. And Forbidden Droplet just kind of ignores that, and makes them essentially useless on the field, which is really good. You do have to give up a lot of resources in order to target multiple monsters though, so it's best used on a handful of targets that would otherwise probably make you lose the duel if you weren't able to play around their effects. Now, speaking of cards with spell speed 4 effects, and at number 4, we have Super Polymerization. This card is a retrain of Polymerization, which is a card that's required in order to go into fusion monsters, unless you have an alternative fusion card that lets you do it instead, which basically every archetype has. Now, what Super Polymerization does is it allows you to use your opponent's monsters for your fusion summons, assuming you have a monster in your extra deck that can use your opponent's monster, like a Starving Venom Fusion Dragon if your opponent has nothing but dark monsters on their side of the field, or a Mud Dragon of the Swamp if they have anything else. And what makes Super Polymerization so good is the fact that it's spell speed 4. Your opponent cannot respond to this card's effect, so it's a really good way of getting rid of your opponent's problem boss monsters with negates, in the same way as Forbidden Droplet. Although, you're a little bit more constrained in which targets you can actually pick with Super Polymerization, since you need to have a set up extra deck with appropriate fusion monsters in order to get rid of your opponent's cards, whereas Forbidden Droplet lets you target anything. However, Super Polymerization only requires you to discard one card, whereas Forbidden Droplet would probably require you to get rid of multiple resources for the same effect. And being able to steal your opponent's resources in order to bring out your own resource, as Starving Venom Fusion Dragon is pretty good on its own, is really good, and that's why Super Polymerization was banned for a long time. Although currently it's at unlimited and sees a healthy amount of competitive play, since it's really good at breaking your opponent's boss monsters and turning them into your own. And at number 3, we have Pot of Extravagance and Pot of Desires. I thought I should put both of these cards at the same spot, since they are both retrains of Pot of Greed, and they both see a ton of competitive play. Although this is another case where the retrains are actually worse than the original. You see, the original allows you to just draw 2 cards with no cost, and it's currently banned because that effect is too good. Pot of Extravagance also allows you to draw up to 2 cards, however it has a whole bunch of restrictions to this, where it can only be used at the start of your main phase 1, requires you to banish 6 random face down cards from your extra deck, and locks you out of drawing any other cards for the rest of the turn. And even with all of these restrictions on drawing 2 cards, it still sees tons of competitive play, and is considered a really good card. Pot of Desires doesn't have as many drawbacks and restrictions. It's just a simple banish the top 10 cards of your deck face down. Then you get to draw 2 cards. This is a pretty tough restriction on some decks, as there's a good chance you'll banish all of your combo pieces needed. But the effect of drawing 2 cards is so good that many competitive decks take the risk anyway. And if you're playing a deck which doesn't rely on a handful of specific combo pieces, then they definitely play this card for consistency. In fact, even decks that do rely on a handful of combo pieces still play Pot of Desires. The ability to just draw 2 cards is super strong, where the 2 weaker retrain versions of Pot of Greed see all kinds of competitive play, even though they tried really hard to balance out those restrictions. And to be fair, they did kind of balance it out. You're losing a lot in order to use these 2 cards, but generally people will build their decks around these 2 cards just so they can get the great effect of drawing 2. And at number 2, we have Lightning Storm. This card is a retrain of Raigeki, which is a card currently limited on the ban list that occasionally sees competitive play, which just allows you to destroy all of your opponent's monsters, which is a really good effect. And what Lightning Storm does is it allows you to choose one of its 2 effects, where it can destroy all of your opponent's attack position monsters, or destroy all of your opponent's spell and trap cards. And in order to use Lightning Storm, you need to control no face-up cards, and it has a hard once per turn on its effect. So Raigeki allows you to destroy all of your opponent's monsters easier, but Lightning Storm allows you to choose either your opponent's monsters or their back row. It's actually one of the most played cards in the metagame right now, mainly for its second effect, to be perfectly honest. Being able to destroy all of your opponent's spell or traps is super good, and the one card that lets you do that is currently banned. So Lightning Storm could be considered both a Raigeki and Harpy's Feather Duster retrain. Although with the restrictions of having no face-up cards means it's squarely a going second card, and something to help you come back from a really bad position. Although even then, it's still great. The choice of being able to wipe out your opponent's monsters or back row is just super good, and this card will probably be hit on the ban list in the future because of just how good that is. Maybe. The restrictions on it are pretty fair, as you can only really use this if you don't have anything else on the field. So it can't be used in order to win more like Raigeki or Harpy's Feather Duster could, and it's more of a board breaking tool than it is an overpowered effect that they forgot to give a proper cost. And at number 1, we have a Brilliant Fusion. I'm sure most people don't even know that this card is actually a retrain of Gem Knight Fusion, which is a fusion spell card that the Gem Knight archetype has, which is basically their polymerization, except it has an extra effect that allows it to return itself to your hand from the graveyard by banishing a Gem Knight monster from the graveyard. So it's actually pretty good in Gem Knight decks. but Brilliant Fusion is pretty good in basically every deck. You see, what Brilliant Fusion does is it allows you to fusion summon a Gem Knight fusion monster using materials from your deck, but it has the cost where the fusion monster you bring out only has 0 attack and defense, which really doesn't matter at all, as the best target to pick with Brilliant Fusion was Gem Knight Seraphinite, which had an effect on the field to allow you to normal summon twice. Now, decks are balanced around the fact that they can only normal summon a single time, so gaining a second normal summon is huge, and gaining the second normal summon while also gaining a monster on the field to use for extra deck plays is even better. And to add more icing to the cake, Gem Knight Seraphinite requires a light attribute monster as one of its materials. So, Brilliant Fusion would allow you to send any light attribute monster from your deck to the graveyard, which could have the potential of giving you more advantage if you sent Fairy Tale Snow to the graveyard before it got banned, or just perform Mage Trick Clown. So with a single Brilliant Fusion, you get 2 monsters on the field with 1 card from your hand, and an additional normal summon for the turn, which was just an insane amount of advantage from a single card, which is why Brilliant Fusion was played in pretty much every deck that could possibly play it, until the card got banned for generating too much advantage from 1 card. And this really good combo extender is technically a retrain of an archetype-specific fusion card, which was meant to help along their archetype, and kind of accidentally was good in everything else as well. Alright, and that's the list. If you think there's any other retrain spell cards that I may have missed, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, as well as ideas for future videos just like this one. And also, fun fact, did you know only 41% of people who watch these videos are actually subscribed to the channel?